Hey y'all, welcome to the channel. Today we're checking out top 10 most evil kings in history.
Many people desire to be remembered by history, but these rulers are remembered for the wrong reasons.
The king.
Welcome to Watch Mojo UK, and today we're counting down our picks for the top 10 evil kings in history. For this list, the individuals do not necessarily have to have held the title of king, as we're including anything equivalent in power. Number 10, John, King of England. Reigning from 1199 to 1216, King John is thought by many historians to have been the worst monarch in British history. And considering how long that history is, that's saying something.
Yeah.
For starters, he betrayed his own brother, who was fighting in the Crusades at the time, by attempting to seize power while he was gone. Eventually, he did become king, and to prevent any potential uprising, it's believed he had his own nephew Arthur murdered. John further alienated the English nobles by losing all of Normandy to France and exiled those he felt suspicious of. To top it off, he frequently forced himself on their wives and immediately broke the agreement of the Magna Carta, beginning the First Barons' War.
King of John. His name is just King John? John Lackland. Yeah, that's some pretty brutal stuff. Killing his nephew and taking the crown from his brother. Pretty evil. But that's kind of the behavior I expect from a medieval king, right? I forget that Normandy was part of England. He lost it to the French. Oh, he was on the money. John was sinfully lustful and lacking in piety. He was excommunicated by the Pope. How did he die? He contracted dysentery. So he pooped to death? That's a fitting death for such an evil man. Poop your guts out.
Number 9, Zheng, Emperor of China. While his era name might have meant right virtue, the Zheng Emperor was neither right nor virtuous. He became emperor at age 14, but had little interest in ruling China. Instead, he invested his time into brothels or his harem, which held so many women that many starved to death due to lack of food. He once ordered his ministers and soldiers to dress up as street vendors so that he could walk through his palace and play act as a commoner in the marketplace. Those who refused were severely punished. He reportedly died at age 29 after he drunkenly fell into the foul waters of the Grand Canal and came down with a fatal illness.
He came to power when he was 14 years old. I feel like without the right coaching, that's a recipe for disaster. Because a 14-year-old kid with endless resources and power, like, probably do some pretty f***ed up shit. Sounds like he did. I wonder if he was pushed into that dirty water.
Of the Grand Canal and came down with a fatal illness.
What fatal illness? It is said that he was drunk while boating on a lake one day in the fall of 1520, fell off, and almost drowned. He died after contracting illnesses from the Grand Canal waters. What illness? It doesn't say. None of my relied upon sources are telling me what illness he had. He probably pooped himself to death like the other guy. He probably had dysentery.
Number 8, Vlad the Impaler, Voivode of Wallachia. You have to figure that the person who inspired Bram Stoker's Dracula wouldn't be the nicest of guys. Vlad reigned as Prince of Wallachia on 3 separate occasions during the 15th century and demonstrated a marked tendency toward bloodthirstiness.
I have to stop it and just look at this actor's face. He looks just like him. He really nailed the mustache.
Purging those who plotted against him was only the start. Vlad enjoyed torturing his prisoners, including roasting them alive, skinning them, and removing several body parts before finally killing them. Of course, his favourite method of execution was impalement, with some sources claiming he once had 20,000 corpses impaled outside the capital city.
Wow.
Vlad sought to earn such a reputation for savagery and brutality that his enemies would be reluctant to attack him, and yeah, he achieved that goal.
20,000 bodies. The odor? I don't think that's worth it. Great to have all your enemies be fearful of you, but you gotta live with that smell. Maybe you get noseblind to it after a while, but dang. No thank you. Wouldn't 2 or 3 impaled bodies out on your front lawn do it? Maybe a couple heads? Seems like that would be effective. But I guess he needed 20,000.
Number 7, Leopold II, King of the Belgians.
Look at that nose.
The second King of the Belgians, Leopold II, earns a spot on this list for his atrocious behaviour in the Congo. Although the Congo was not a colony of Belgium, Leopold secured it on the grounds that he would improve the lives of the native inhabitants. To put it simply, he did not. He forced the natives to harvest rubber, earning him a fortune, but leading to the deaths of around 10 million Congo natives. The men were forced to work, and if they refused, their wives and children were mutilated. Reports of extreme human rights abuses eventually led to a huge international scandal, and ultimately, Leopold was forced to surrender the colony.
10 million people. What a jerk. Yeah, look at that schnoz. Great beard. Whoa. Looks like J.P. Morgan, doesn't he? Wow. This doesn't say how he died. Let's hope it was slow and painful.
Number 6. Herod the Great, King of Judea. The ancient world has its fair share of terrible rulers, and Herod ranks right near the top of the list. The King of Judea from 37 BC to 4 BC, he is perhaps best remembered for the Bible's account of his attempted murder on Jesus Christ as an infant. The Bible states that Herod tried to achieve this goal by ordering the murder of every boy under 2 years of age in Bethlehem, although some sources claim this may have never actually happened. He had several of his family members murdered, including his wife and sons, and his enormous spending was largely responsible for the debilitating poverty amongst his people. No wonder he needed some 2,000 soldiers as bodyguards.
Yeah, did that happen? Apparently the Jesus stuff is debatable, not to stir up any controversy, but that's what the video said. Herod died in Jericho after an excruciatingly painful, putrefying illness of uncertain cause, known to posterity as Herod's evil. Josephus states that the pain of his illness led Herod to attempt suicide by stabbing, and that the attempt was thwarted by his cousin. In some much later narratives and depictions, the attempted succeeds. Oh. Josephus stated that Herod was so concerned that no one would mourn his death that he commanded a large group of distinguished men to come to Jericho, and he gave an order that they should be killed at the time of his death, so that the displays of grief that he craved would take place. So he was afraid people would not grieve for him, so he wanted other people to be killed at the same time so that their families and friends grieving for them could be attributed to him. But then maybe that didn't happen. But at least it was an excruciatingly painful, putrefying illness of uncertain cause. He pooped to death.
Number 5. Genghis Khan, Great Khan of the Mongol Empire.
Yeah.
The founder of what would become the largest contiguous empire the world has ever seen, Genghis Khan was certainly an effective leader, but he was also extremely ruthless. His army didn't only crush other armies, it destroyed civilians and children along with the armed soldiers. In fact, some sources claim that over 700,000 people were murdered in one massacre alone.
Wow.
He allowed his soldiers to rape women in front of their families and enslaved hundreds of thousands of people. Considered by many to be a genocidal ruler, it's estimated his armies killed somewhere between 20 and 60 million people during his 21-year reign.
It's interesting because Genghis Khan is kind of thought of as a really brilliant leader. But he did a lot of horrible stuff. Maybe he was a brilliant leader. But, I mean, if you don't have morals weighing you down, anybody could be a brilliant leader and kill 60 million people. How did he die? Oh, he fell for... I remember this guy. Genghis suffered a fall from his horse while hunting in the winter of 1226 to 27 and became increasingly ill during the following months. They don't really say how he died. He fell from his horse and became sicker. Dysentery. He pooped to death.
Number 4. Nero, Emperor of the Roman Empire.
Oh, yeah.
He was the man who fiddled while Rome burned. Although this claim is contested by several historical scholars, as the fiddle wasn't invented until the 10th century, Nero was no doubt one of the worst emperors in the history of the Roman Empire. He murdered several members of his own family, including his wife, whom he reportedly kicked to death while she was pregnant, as well as his mother and aunt. Nero also forced his top advisor to commit suicide. He blamed the Great Fire of Rome on Christians and used them as human torches to light his palace. In fact, his treatment of Christians was so horrific that many Christians believed him to be the Antichrist. He eventually committed suicide, ending a 14-year reign of terror.
He kicked his wife to death. He killed his mother and his aunt. He killed his mother. He made his advisor commit suicide. Wow. What a jerk. I don't like that he killed himself because he had the power to the end. Oh, his advisor was Seneca. Seneca tried to influence Nero for the better, and he embraced the Stoic ideal that the entire world was a community advocating the humane treatment of slaves. Seneca tried unsuccessfully to retire, but was forced to stay. When the Pisonian conspiracy had been revealed, Nero decided that Seneca too must have been in on the plot, even though he was probably innocent. Nero ordered him to kill himself. Seneca was at a villa he owned a little outside of Rome. Granius Silvanus, tribune of the Praetorian Guard, arrived with a group of soldiers right when Seneca was at supper with his wife and two of his friends. Silvanus relayed the emperor's orders, after which Seneca calmly tried to explain that he had nothing to do with the conspiracy. The tribune returned to Rome, but Nero told him to go back to Seneca and ordered him to kill himself. Tacitus notes that Silvanus took the long way back to Seneca's villa, as he had himself been one of the conspirators. In the end, he resolved to send a centurion in his stead and demand that the philosopher perform the deed. So the guy Nero told to tell Seneca to kill himself was one of the conspirators. The centurion arrived back at Seneca's villa and told him what had to be done. Seneca then turned and embraced his wife, asking her not to grieve too much, but Paulina told him flatly that she too had resolved to die. Together they cut the veins on their arms. However, Seneca bled only a little, supposedly due to his age and his frugal diet, so that he also cut his knees and legs. Seeing his wife suffer both on account of her own wounds and her seeing him try vainly to kill himself, Seneca ordered his wife to withdraw to another room. But Nero had ordered Pompey Paulina to live, her slaves in freedom by the order of the soldiers, tended to her wounds. Tacitus suggests that she didn't realize this at the time. Perhaps she had fainted on account of loss of blood. In the meantime, Seneca was dictating his last words to scribes. As bleeding to death was taking too long, he asked one of his friends to prepare a poison, perhaps inspired by the death of the ancient Greek philosopher Socrates. He took the poison, and it didn't work either. In the hope of easing his pain and causing the blood to flow out more quickly, Seneca took a bath with warm water. Seneca expired soon afterwards. He was then, according to his wishes, cremated without any of the usual and often ostentatious funeral rites. What a horrible death. So first he cut his arms to try to bleed out. His wife was so distraught that she did too. That didn't work. It took forever. He saw his wife suffering and he couldn't watch it, so he made her go to another room where the Roman soldiers kept her alive. Seneca still wasn't dying, so he drank some poison. That didn't work. So he got in a warm bath. And finally that worked. Horrible. Yeah, Nero, maybe he should be number one. Who's worse than this? Let's see.
He blamed the Great Fire of Rome on Christians and used them as human torches to light his palace.
Hang on. I didn't catch that the first time. He used Christians, as in human bodies, as light? For light?
Number 3, Caligula, Emperor of the Roman Empire. From one Roman emperor to another, the supremely sadistic Caligula actually ruled before Nero and may have provided the blueprint for Nero's madness.
Probably.
Believing he was a god, Caligula quickly began murdering people for his own amusement when he became Rome's third emperor in AD 37. He was rumored to have forced his 3 sisters to have sex with him, and frequently had sex with the wives of his personal bodyguards, whom he made stand outside the room and listen. He made it illegal for people to mention the word goat in his presence under the punishment of death, and tried to make his horse a Roman consul. As a surprise to no one, his own guards eventually assassinated him.
So he didn't die from pooping himself, but at least, that fits. That must have felt so good. Why didn't they do that earlier? It's one thing to kill a bunch of people, but forcing your sisters to have sex with you is a deeper level of insanity.
Number 2, Ivan the Terrible, Tsar of all the Russias.
Oh.
When terrible becomes your epithet, you know you've done a few bad things during your time. Although considered by many to be an effective ruler, Ivan often fell into fits of uncontrollable rage. One of these fits resulted in the murder of his son, while another resulted in the severe beating of his pregnant daughter-in-law, possibly causing a miscarriage. He also used a mounted police force and gave them absolute power to arrest and execute anyone they desired. Any nobles he disliked he had crushed, going so far as to have one of them eaten alive by dogs, and he massacred the people of Novgorod because he distrusted them. Is it any wonder Joseph Stalin considered him to be a great man?
Ivan the Terrible. I have to say, I've heard the name, but I really haven't heard much about him. How did he die? Absolute power corrupts absolutely, right? This seems like a common theme. Oh, he was around in the 1500s. That's a long time ago. I mean, that's back when people killed each other all the time, right? Ivan died from a stroke while he was playing chess with Bogdan Belsky. Well, that's not fun. I wish he survived the stroke and had to be, like, in a non-working body, trapped. Hopefully it was a painful stroke.
Before we unveil our number 1 pick, here are a few dishonourable mentions.
Henry VI, King of England. What's his story? He was timid, shy, passive, well-intentioned, and adverse to warfare. It doesn't sound so bad. He became king at 9 months old. That can't be good. Why was he so evil? What did he do? Oh, the War of the Roses. He was imprisoned at the Tower of London. He was reported as dead, but he was probably not. According to the blah blah blah, an official chronicle favorable to Edward IV, Henry died of melancholia. But it is widely suspected, however, that Edward IV, who was recrowned the morning following Henry's death, had ordered his murder. Yeah, I don't know of anyone who's died of melancholia. Richard II. What did he do that was so bad? Oh, he was in the Shakespeare plays, War of the Roses as well, right? Okay, so this is the famous King Richard from the Shakespeare. How'd he die? He is thought to have starved to death in captivity. He probably pooped to death. They just didn't want to say it. Yeah, in the Shakespeare play, he was made to seem cruel, vindictive, and irresponsible. But Shakespeare took many liberties. Who's number 1? Henry VIII? Can't be.
Number 1, Attila the Hun, ruler of the Hunnic Empire.
Okay.
Nicknamed the Scourge of God, Attila was the ruler of the Huns from 434 to 453. He preyed on the Western Roman Empire, sacking cities and slaughtering their inhabitants. He forced towns to pay large sums of gold to prevent him from attacking. Attila particularly enjoyed gruesome forms of execution, often impaling his enemies through the rectum and leaving them to die a slow, painful death.
Pooping to death.
In fact, it's said that the corpses of one massacred city completely clogged up the Danube River for years. After his death, he committed one more act of cruelty by having the men who buried him murdered to keep the location of his coffin a secret.
Wow.
Do you agree with our picks?
Attila the Hun. How did he die? I mean, he sounds like a pretty typical gangster, charging people money so he doesn't hurt them. The conventional account from Priscus says that Attila was at a feast celebrating his latest marriage, this time to the beautiful long... In the midst of the revels, however, he suffered severe bleeding and died. He may have had a nosebleed and choked to death in a stupor, or he may have succumbed to internal bleeding, possibly due to ruptured esophageal varices. Esophageal varices are dilated veins that form in the lower part of the esophagus, often caused by years of excessive alcohol consumption. They are fragile and can easily rupture, leading to death by hemorrhage. He choked to death. That's gotta be terrifying. I feel like he deserved it. And he had the people who buried him murdered to keep the location of his coffin a secret. The people who murdered the people who buried him, who were they? Why were they afraid of being cursed or haunted by Attila? Weird, right? Once he's dead, they could, like, do whatever they want, right? I don't know. I don't get that. Wow, these last few were pretty horrible people, but I feel like Nero and Caligula take the cake in my book. With all the incest and the killing of your family and horrible stuff. Horrible stuff. At least a few of them pooped to death. That's gotta be bad. We can all rest assured that they laid in a pile of crap as they died. This was a long time ago, but in terms of human evolution, it wasn't that long ago. And there are still people walking this earth with tendencies like that. Scary. Let's hope none of them come to power. Anyway, fascinating video. Thank y'all for watching it with me, and I'll see y'all next time. Later.